We're basically heading up to the top of the sand ridge here. In 1907 to 1908, they put together this narrow gauge rail. Yeah, see, there's all this blue green stuff that's Chrysopolo. Sure. Star Wars crash disaster. Yeah. Last time on Across the Mojave, the goal is to be at the base of the Soda Mountains by noon, or ideally a little earlier tomorrow. As you can see, those are still pretty far away. I'm meeting some friends there who are going to hike with me for the next week. I don't want to be late for them. Oh, it's still too dark for you to see much other than the horizon there, but so last night I kept walking until 8:15 before I got to where I wanted to camp based on the plan, and then looked on my maps. Looks like it's gonna be another 14.5 miles I need to cover in the morning before I get to my supply point where I'm meeting up with my friends. So I got up at 4. I've already been walking the better part of an hour, and you can just now see the light of dawn coming up there. So we're entering this little wilderness gap here. Head across that, and then it's just another, I don't know, 12.5 miles to Zzyzx. Something like that. Alright, coming out of the power lines now, back in the wilderness again. Well, now that it's bright enough to read, I checked my pack thermometer. It says it's 27 Fahrenheit, or I guess that's like -3 Celsius. And I thought I felt a little crunch around the edges of my among the edges of my water bag this morning. The sun is almost here. I'm almost to the this ridge here. There's really a sand dune. We are, after all, still in the Devil's Playground. I guess you could say these are the Devil's Sandcastles here. But over this ridge, and then it's, I think, about 4 miles more of active dune, sort of as the sand is piled up all against this ridge here. So that'll slow me down a little bit. Well, now that we're up in the foot of the dune, the sun is getting closer. Oh, there my shadow is. It's definitely a beautiful time of day to be on the dunes. We're basically heading up to the top of the sand ridge here. Yeah, it was too cold to eat breakfast earlier. I just ate a couple crackers. So, yeah, I think it's breakfast time. We've yet to see actual volcanic rocks from Mesozoic yet. But yeah, I think that's what it is. You see it's got little chunks of different stuff. So it's a breccia of some sort. So it's a volcanic breccia. What kind of volcanic breccia? That's a good question. You know, from the dark color, I'd be inclined to say that maybe this is like an andesite flow. Andesite is a very thick lava, a little thicker than like kind of basalt you'd find at Hawaii, and it tends to break up. Well, kind of like the Agua flows at Hawaii that break up in little chunks. This could be one of those. We see similar volcanic rocks like this in the Soda Mountains, right behind the CSU Desert Study Center. I've looked at those ones before. Okay, well, that white lake out there is Soda Lake. And that's what I'm going to cross. Well, after I get out of the dune fields, that's the next thing to cross. The Soda Lake is a dry lake bed that basically forms the end of the Mojave River these days. There's little white splotches at the bottom of the feet of the mountain. And I think the CSU Desert Study Center is at the right edge of the leftmost white splotch at the bottom of the mountain. Random outcrop of rock sticking out of the sand here. Huh. This is a limestone. You can tell by the way it's got these little grooves on it. See, here, some of these like stripes here, these are probably etched by the sand. They're basically what we'd call ventifacts. Again, limestone is a pretty soft rock compared to the typical sand grains here. Here's another feature typical of limestones. You see these little squiggles here. These are called stylolites. This is when the limestone is heated up under pressure underground. It starts to dissolve, and because it's calcite, because limestone is made of calcite, calcium carbonate, and that's pretty soluble in water, especially at higher temperatures and pressures. And the dissolved calcium carbonate escapes through these veins. But then as the calcite leaves through the vein, the two sides get pushed together, and you're left with a little seam of insoluble stuff. And the little teeth on the stylolites end up going parallel to the direction that shortens across as it dissolves out in the middle. There's another one there. So yeah, I don't know what age this limestone is. I haven't seen anything that looks like a fossil, from at least from the distance I'm walking at here, which is not super close. But there are a lot of limestones over by the Desert Study Center that are Permian in age. So the little over 250 million years old. So before the dinosaurs really took over. The white surface is the playa, and that should at least be an easy walk, I'm hoping. Unless it's gotten more rain than I thought out here, and it's turned into a sea of mud. Yeah, when it rains, playas turn into wet, goopy mud of the sort that you couldn't possibly cross. So I don't know how many more miles of this kind of dune I have to do, because this stuff is real slow. Devil has not let me out of his playground yet. Oh, this is a steep one. Ah. Well, I'm finally reaching the last of the dunes, and starting to be some playa surface in between them. But I've basically escaped the Devil's Playground. That kid's a bully. I'm not sure the surface is actually easier to walk on than the sand, because your feet sink into it. This is Soda Dry Lake, which is another wet playa, and a wet playa because the groundwater is very close to the surface here. So that means that salts can seep up to the surface and leave this crusty stuff that's sort of difficult to walk on. It's kind of like walking on snow. Yeah, so the salts here are largely sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda. Well, just a few more miles of walking through this stuff, or maybe several miles. I have to look at the map. I'm not exactly sure how many miles it is. I'm pretty sure it's more than 4. Well, I've gotten probably at least a mile or so out into playa, maybe a little further. You also see, if you look down this side, there's a nice little mirage effect. It looks like there's some water down there, or the sky is flowing into the thing, and that's just basically the mirage effect is caused by the surface of the playa is just a little bit hotter than the air above it, and hotter air has lower density and has a higher speed of light, and that effectively makes the playa surface act as a mirror and reflect the sky, leading to the classic mirage effect. And when you're reflecting the sky, it looks blue. So people, you know, who are traveling the desert sometimes then confuse that for water, and then they walk off in search of the water and discover it's nothing but a hot playa surface. Okay, we're now taking a brief gap in the wilderness to cross the 1981 recreation of the Mojave Trail. The original Mojave Trail was the main route across the Mojave Desert, first by foot and then by wagon. The original Mojave Trail, of course, would have headed straight towards Soda Springs there, which was the first water source in a long way. It's actually the longest waterless stretch on the Mojave Trail was between Soda Springs here and I think Marl Springs in the second mountain range back that way. A similar distance to what I've walked from Coyote Springs, probably. So the original Mojave Trail that led here was pioneered by the Mojave Indians, and the Mojave people probably give their name to the whole desert. You know, their homeland of the Mojave is actually way back on the banks of the Colorado River, but this was their main trade route for trading goods with the coastal Indians. So probably the fact that they were frequent travelers of this route is why their name is attached to the whole desert, not just the eastern part where they actually lived. And so the first European to travel this route was Padre Francisco Garces in 1776. Now, of course, that time this land was de facto still in control of the native peoples. although it was claimed by Spain at that time. So although it's 1776 and not part of America yet. The first American to travel on the Mojave Trail to Soda Springs here was Jedediah Smith in 1826. By the late 1850s, there had been a pretty good wagon trail established. And then in 1860 and 1867, the Army built some barracks and sort of defensive structures here in order to protect travelers from attacks from various Indian groups that happened from time to time. But then basically the Mojave Trail fell out of use as soon as the railroad lines went through, starting 1877 for the Southern Pacific Line, and then 1883 for the one a little bit closer to here. So up here, this jumble of sticks on the ground, if I'm not mistaken, if you look closely, they're all lined up in a row. I believe these sticks here are the ties of an old narrow gauge railroad built here by the Pacific Coast Soda Company in 1907 to 1908. They put together this narrow gauge rail line. You can see some more of them going off in the distance in places they're missing. But they built this narrow gauge railroad and also a chemical processing plant in order to separate sodium bicarbonate, which is just baking soda, sodium sulfate, and salt out of the salts here. So they put on this huge investment, and then in 1908 there was a big rainstorm, and all of the salts, all of the soda, were dissolved by the rain and washed back down into the groundwater. And shortly after that, they went financially insolvent in 1911. Now, if I were trying to do an entirely natural version of this hike where I was just getting water from natural sources, I would head to MC Spring, which is one of those clumps of trees over near the middle to left side of that hill, or near one of those clumps of trees, I should say. But I'm not going to do that for two reasons. First of all, the water is brackish and rich in magnesium salts, which give it a natural laxative effect, which is not really what you want out here. And second of all, that spring hosts the endangered Mojave tui chub. And in fact, at some point in the mid-20th century, it was the only remaining home for the Mojave tui chub, it's a small fish that used to be common throughout the Mojave Desert in various springs here and there. These days, there are only a few little water holes and springs where it still ekes out a existence. Yeah, so instead of going to MC Spring, I'm gonna head over to the CSU Desert Studies Center. Now, they have reverse osmosis filtered water there, which has the salinity removed from it. And most of the buildings you can see over there were actually built by Curtis Howe Springer between 1944 and 1974. He was sort of a radio faith healer, and he invited his followers and really anyone who wanted to come to stay here, and if they didn't have money, he would let them stay for free. And he sort of operated as a sort of health spa slash faith healing clinic sort of thing. And he also had a famous radio broadcast he did from here. Unfortunately, he built all this stuff on federal government land under the false pretense of having a mining claim, which he didn't really have, or at least not a legal one. So the federal government finally got up and evicted him in 1974. And seeing that there was this nice campus of buildings here being unused, the California State University then came to an agreement with the Bureau of Land Management to reuse the buildings here as a desert research center. And so today, since 1976 and still today, the site is now used by dozens of scientists and other researchers every year, and thousands of students come here every year. Well, okay, maybe not since the start of the pandemic. The pandemic has cut down on the users quite a bit, but in past times, thousands of students would come here every year to study the desert whether geology or biology or other aspects of the desert. As it happens, I'm actually on the board of governors of the CSU Desert Studies Consortium, which operates the center, among other things. So the staff know me and are expecting my visit. Generally speaking, although there's a little lake here that the public can visit along the Boulevard of Dreams, most of the buildings are off limits to the public unless you're here for research purposes and you've made reservations in advance. But it's definitely not a ghost town. We are now at the edge of the wilderness here. So now we're out of the wilderness and I'm just going to walk up here and get my supplies. So this building here is sort of the main building. Yeah, so public is actually supposed to stay on that side of the fence. I'm not quite sure where my friends are going to be. Yeah, so all these are dormitories and housing for visiting researchers and students. Here, I'll be meeting up with Scott, a senior geologist at Parsons and former Cal Poly Pomona master's student, and Robert, a quality assurance manager at Taco Bell, who runs 35 miles a week. Scott, for his master's project, studied Proterozoic metasedimentary rocks in a particularly rugged part of the San Gabriel Mountains with over 2 kilometers or 7,000 feet of vertical relief. Both had recently completed a day hike up Mount San Gorgonio, the tallest peak in Southern California. Okay, so we're here at Zzyzx. I've just restocked my supplies and water and met up with Robert and Scott.
Hello.
Hey. These guys are going to be hiking with me for the next almost a week, so
yeah,
you'll be able to see lots of them.
We're ready. We'll see how long we last.
Yes, we've come back out into the wilderness here, and now we're just heading out to the right side of that brown butte there. It's going to be more playa walking. The next place we hoped to refill our water bags was 2 days and 33 miles, or 53 kilometers, away, at an unnamed, unknown, and extremely remote spring in the rugged Avawatz Mountains. But these are actually old salt ponds for, I think it was the Pacific Salt and Soda Company. This is another company that was trying to extract baking soda out of the lake here. I think they started in like 1907 and were bankrupt by 1913. So yeah, one of two companies that took advantage of the railroad through here. Okay, so we're coming up here on the grade of the Tidewater and Tonopah Railway. You can see some little bits of the railroad ties are still here. So this part of the railway was constructed in 1907. I think it was built by Coleman, of the mineral colemanite, who had a borax mine in Death Valley, and he was going to build a railroad to it, and then some other railroad tycoon bought up all the land to build what I think is now the Union Pacific line through here. And so then out of spite he built this one, which crosses the Union Pacific line but doesn't actually connect with it at all. But then of course the mines in Death Valley ran out of stuff pretty quickly after they finished the railroad, and it didn't really get used for that very much. But there were other mines in Nevada that served for a while. Then it was used for tourism to Death Valley in the early part of the 20th century, but it never really made any money, and they tore up all the rails for steel for World War II. So yeah, the Tidewater and Tonopah Railway, despite having both Tidewater and Tonopah in its name, never went to the ocean and never made it to Tonopah, Nevada either. One milestone I forgot to mention to the YouTube audience was I've now completed over 300 miles, so I'm like 60% of the way there. Okay, well, we're finally coming up to the edge of the playa here. Out onto the... Actually, it looks like we have a little bit of sand dunes here, actually. And then out onto the alluvium. Now we're going to head up towards the freeway. Somewhere in that gap, we should be able to find a culvert to cross under. And then up into the Soda Mountains to camp. Okay, I think this is totally the actual Arrowhead Rail, because look, there's chunks of pavement here.
Oh yeah?
So I think this is the actual 1926 Arrowhead route. Later Highway 91, the precursor to the 15. Okay, well, we're now approaching this culvert. It looks pretty big. I think this is gonna be no problem. Ah, easy peasy.
Camp here tonight? It'll be shielded from the wind, maybe?
Yeah, but you're gonna have the car noise all night long.
Yeah, I think this is getting more.
Okay, I have to take off the pack. My pack is taller than you guys's.
It is getting smaller. Feels like powerful under there.
Oh, this is getting painful.
The Star Wars trash compactor. Yeah.
Hopefully none of those tentacle monsters in here. Okay, here we're just climbing out of the little canyon that goes under the freeway. So I think we're heading roughly towards the right edge of the mountain there. So we're outside of the wilderness area now. We basically left, actually yes, we left both the Mojave Wilderness and the Mojave National Preserve right before we crossed the freeway. The Soda Mountains Wilderness basically starts near the bottom of the mountain, but I don't think we're going to make it all the way there tonight. We'll make it to the foot of the mountain, close to the foot of the mountain, where hopefully there'll be some better kinds of wood besides just creosote bush, which is terrible for baking with. Well, just talking and walking, and the sun set on us without really noticing. But it's nice and pretty now. The lights on the tops of the peaks. And we still need to get to the base of the mountain. There's a beautiful ribbon of Vegas traffic there on I-15. Okay, well, we've made camp here. Okay, take two now with batteries. They're actually getting started now. See the lights of Baker still glimmering down there. Leaving our little camp canyon. Nicely sheltered from the wind, and I think we're heading up. We're a hell of a bit further to where my map shows the wilderness boundary. We're already in the wilderness according to Scott's GPS map, but I don't know, I compared a number of sites when I was looking at my wilderness boundaries, but oh, we're starting to get rays of the rising sun on the Soda Mountains over here to our left. Still a bit of the sunrise colors out there. Sleepy town of Baker, just still heading up this Louisville fan here, trying to get closer to the wilderness. And now the sun is on us. Houston, we have a shadow. Well, the GPS says we should now be in the Soda Mountains wilderness. We're ahead, I think actually down a little bit across the fan, because some of these canyons up here are going to be really deep, so we're going to have to go down around those. And then we'll turn back up towards the pass. We just walk straight down this, and on the other side is the tricky part. Over there. That looks like we get a nice little slot canyon going down that way through the conglomerates. Okay, what was my plan? Distance didn't look too bad. Up close, I'm not so sure. I think, if my memory is correct, that should be the last of the nasties. Sure. So having crossed now the last of these nasty little canyons, got time to turn up towards the mountain. The low pass would actually be over that way. It would be the lowest pass over the Soda Mountains, but we can't go that way because there's a road and it's not in the wilderness. So yeah, so we're heading up this dark ridge on the left. And the right ridge heads up to where there's some mining claims. That was actually the reason we need to detour up the mountains here, because there's a road that's not in the wilderness leading up to the mining claims. Actually, you can maybe see a little hole up on the top of the mountain there. Might be a little mine shaft. Those mining claims apparently were claimed by Trobe Gross, who was the geologist who mapped this area back in 1953 to 1959. Interestingly, I've actually met Trobe. I met him while mapping the Warner Range in northeastern California back in 2005. He must have been close to 80 at that time and still out there doing geologic mapping. Here's some old mine camp debris. I wonder if old Trobe Gross had a little camp out here. Built himself a little cabin, maybe? I'll have to... Oh, here's a foundation, actually. A little stone foundation. Okay, well, we just have a conference here. We decided... oh, is that a waterfall up there? Hopefully not. Well, we've decided that I'm going to take the difficult route around the wilderness exclusion by myself. And they're just going to take the easy route over the low pass. So they don't hold me up, because they were concerned they might hold me up. I'm not sure they're going to hold me up. So far, they've been keeping at pretty good speed. So we're just going to meet on the other side of the mountain in like an hour. I'm really concerned there's going to be a waterfall around this corner, though. It really looks like the kind of canyon that has a waterfall in it. Yes, sir. Oh, well, I might be able to climb that, though. Not holding a camera, though. Well, sorry to film that, but I did manage to climb up. Okay, which ridge do I head up? Too close to the bottom of the mountain to see. This looks a little easier place to leave the stream and get up onto the ridge. Oh, here's some green rocks. But yeah, see, there's all this blue-green stuff. That's chrysocolla. It's a copper silicate. Common alteration mineral. Found where there's copper. Copper and silver and gold all come together. Actually, there's a sizable pit there. Big pile of tailings here. Don't want to fall down that. Okay, I think up here we're going to come across basically the summit of the Soda Mountains, where we'll be able to see down across the other side. Those mountains looming up over the horizon are the Avawatz Mountains. That's where we're headed next. Although we're not going there in a straight line, because we need to stay to the wilderness. We have to do a little detour out onto Silver Lake Playa out there and back to maximize our time in the wilderness. But yeah, the plan is to get to the foot of the Avawatz Mountains by the end of the day. That doesn't look so bad, actually. Well, if it's in a straight line, it wouldn't be so bad. I can actually see Scott and Robert down. They're getting close to the pass now. Okay, gotta go. Okay, now it's just down this ridge. It actually looks like kind of a nasty ridge now I look at it. But on this ridge is this layer here. These crystals look like garnet, actually. This massive brown layer of garnet. Again, the crystals are maybe an inch in size, or not an inch, a centimeter in size, but not very well formed. And then there's this big breccia layer. I remember reading in the literature about people arguing about whether or not there was a detachment fault in the Soda Mountains. This could be the detachment fault, which often have breccias and things like that on them. So we'd be just over the top of the detachment fault. Oh right, I was supposed to, sorry. I realized I was supposed to collect a sample of this rock back here. Let me go back and get that. But yeah, looks like there might be this brown layer of breccia and then the limestone on top. So this would have been a fault where presumably the top layer was sliding down off the bottom layer. Well, sometimes these can get tilted as the original direction of sliding is not the current direction of down, but hard to say what happened here. But that just reminded me that I was going to get a sample of this plutonic rock back here. Because I have a student who's currently working in the Soda Mountains. One little knifey ridge here. Yeah, I got like 15 minutes before those guys start worrying, but it should be all downhill from here. And once I get off this knife ridge, it should get a lot faster. Yeah, still garnet in this part of the detachment too. At least I saw some pop out there. Must have been hot when that thing was brecciated. There's another possibility is it could have been originally an intrusive contact between the granite, that gray granite that I took a sample of, and the limestone. Because often along an intrusive contact, we have a granite go into a limestone. The hot fluids from the granite will often make garnets. You can even get brecciation along an intrusive contact if it's in the shallow up in the crust. So it's possible that it's not even a detachment. It was just a very shallow intrusive contact, but it looks to me more like something that's a very planar contact, and it's a very angular breccia. I'm thinking it's probably maybe was a intrusive contact that then was remobilized as a detachment fault. And anytime you have a geologic contact between two types of rocks, it tends to be a little bit weaker than the surrounding stuff, and that's where you're more likely to get a fault. Detachment is just a very specific type of fault that dips at a low angle. Sorry, I'm a little late. I forgot that I had to stop and collect a sample there. Took me a little extra time. Another funny thing about the northern Soda Mountains is on some old maps, there's actually a spring out here, Meso Spring, or Agua de Meso in older maps. And I spent a long time trying to find this spring because it would have been great to have another water source out here. Meso Springs or Agua de Meso does not show up in any modern maps. So it's like a lost spring that used to be known and now doesn't exist, or it may be the same as Bitter Spring, which is another 15 miles west of here. Apparently Tío Meso, who the spring was originally named after in Mexican times, was a prospector stumbling through the desert. Tío means uncle, so it's like Uncle Meso. And he was out of water and stumbling around, and he happened across this spring and thought it was a miracle from God and had a big party when he got there, basically. And so the spring got named after him. Another milestone or kilometer stone I missed back there is I've now passed over 500 kilometers. I think we're up to about 503 now. Still heading down this pass towards Silver Lake Playa. So I was collecting a sample of this granite here. Scott went out and checked this random pole out in the desert. There's apparently a pan full of marbles, which is a little random. Things people leave in the desert. Why? Here we have a brittle bush that's fully in bloom. Some of the most wildflowers we've seen yet on this trip. Okay, so here we're finally coming to the end of the alluvial plain and the beginning of the playa. This is Silver Lake Playa, probably named because of the mirages down there. The mirages you frequently get on it make it look silvery. So Silver Lake Playa, fortunately, is a dry playa, meaning the groundwater is way below surface, and so it's got this nice classic mud crack surface, the kind you could race a car on. Not this one though, it's the wilderness area, but it makes it real easy to walk on. Basically, Silver Lake only floods when the Mojave River has already filled up Soda Lake, and then it spills over here, which doesn't happen that frequently. I think it's happened historically, but it's not a common occurrence. I think maybe it happened in 2007, I want to say. The Mojave River flooded over this far. Okay, so we've now reached the edge of the Soda Mountains wilderness, and now we're going to continue on out of the wilderness, across the gap there, and then we'll turn left into the Avawatz Mountains, which are the ones in the horizon there. Get their foot by dark, hopefully. One thing I'll point out is you guys can see on that hill over there, see how it's got all the black rocks stop it along a straight line at the bottom?
Yeah.
So that's the shoreline that this lake gets to before it spills over. Last reached 9,000 years ago. Okay, so we're finally off the playa here. After a long walk, we're approaching the power line road. You can sort of see here the old shoreline along the base of those hills here. We're gonna keep heading for this gap. And I need to remember to drop off my rocks someplace where I can find them later. So this movement of rocks here looks man-made, but up ahead, I think this canyon is basically the canyon of the Paleo Mojave River from the last time it flooded out this way 9,000 years ago. Or it last flooded 9,000 years ago. It may have flooded this way many times before that, during wet times, when Silver Lake overfilled its banks. You can tell it's not active now because it just got loose sand in the bottom. No real sign any stream has flowed in this in historical times. Okay, so according to the GPS, or at least according to my GPS, we are now in the Avawatz Mountains wilderness. Unfortunately, there's a weird bite out of it on this corner, so we can't walk straight to the Avawatz Mountains. We need to keep going this way a little bit more, and then turn left to the Avawatz Mountains. Okay, we've now come to the mystery point near the corner of the Fort Irwin Military Reservation. These campfire circles seem to be pretty close, probably, to the corner. And we think that straight line going up the hill might actually be the fence line. Although why they don't have it fenced in the corner, we don't know. But now we just need to head up to the corner of that mountain up there on the left edge of the ridge where it comes down and hits that big alluvial fan to the right of the fence line there. So then it's time for camp. At this rate, it looks like we'll get there before dark, but I think it's still a lot farther than it looks, and it's also uphill. Somewhere around here would be my best guess for the location of the old Spanish Trail. Would have gone through the gap in the mountains over there, and then come across this playa up towards, I'm not quite sure where that way, eventually towards Las Vegas. Some parts of the old Spanish Trail were developed as early as the 1500s, but this California section wasn't developed till 1829 by Mexican citizen Antonio Armijo. But then the route was abandoned when the railroads were built in the late 19th century. So a relatively short lifespan. I doubt any of the wagon ruts are still preserved here because it's sort of in a wash, but we can keep our eyes out for wagon parts. Still struggling up this alluvial fan towards the corner of the mountain up there. The sun is saying goodbye, and I say good riddance. It's been shining in our eyes and making it too hot. Clouds are prettying up again. That sort of second sunset. When you get past, the sun is now completely set, but the clouds are lighting up. Long day once again. I don't know if you can make them out, but my companions are ahead, maybe 100 yards. Mountain does look like it's getting a little closer, but not as fast as one might like. Okay, so here we are at our camp in the Avawatz Mountains. The sun is already up and shining on us. I need to update you guys though on some developments we've had overnight. Last night we got into camp and Robert took off his shoes, his boots, discovered blisters over most or all of his toes. So we've made the hard decision that Scott and Robert are gonna hike out today, and I'll continue on my lonesome. Yep. So I don't know if you guys have anything you want to say to the folks back home.
It's a bust. Yeah. Yeah, I wish we could join, but better safe than sorry.
Yeah, always better safe than sorry. So, you know, last thing you want to do is get up in the middle of the mountains and then get like a infected foot and have to be airlifted out for $80,000.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been really, really great, but
for sure,
very difficult. Yesterday was really intense. Thought we'd never make it here.
Fun times though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just have to go do some more of those intense days. Have to get hiking actually, so I can get to the spring. I actually think I have enough water, so should be good. Okay. Cheers. Thanks. Yeah. Good luck. Be safe. Highway 127 down there across the valley. There's only 5 or 6 miles away, all downhill. There's actually a road that passes near here, which I didn't walk on the way up because it goes outside the wilderness area. But so Scott and Robert are just going to follow that road back down. I think the road doesn't go quite in the absolute shortest direction, so it might be more than 5 or 6 miles. But it should be a not too difficult walk to get out. And we're in an area with cell phone coverage, so they have emergency response capabilities if they need it. And Scott's already called up his dad, and his dad's going to come out and pick them up on the highway there. So I'm not just abandoning them in the middle of the desert. They have enough water, they have enough battery charge in their phones, they have cell signal. Robert can still walk, it's just painful. At least as of now, you know, it doesn't have any infected blisters yet. So today's one of the tougher days of the trip, actually. I have to gain, I think, 1,400 meters of elevation, which is like 4,600 feet of elevation gain today, so the better part of a vertical mile. And hopefully I can find water. There are some unnamed springs in the Avawatz range that are so remote I couldn't find any trip descriptions if anyone had ever been there on the internet. So I'm hoping there are in fact springs where marked. was hoping they'd stick with me a little bit longer. It does get a little lonely out here, hiking by yourself for long periods of time, but I'm sure I'll manage.